In this video, we'll walk you through the complete third-party vendor life cycle from RFI and RFP stages to understanding the teams involved and their roles at each step. Many websites talk about 5 or 6 phases of the vendor life cycle, but to explain it in detail, we've broken it down into 8 phases: need, identification, selection or rejection, onboarding, monitoring, re-evaluation, contract renewal or termination, and finally, offboarding. The insights shared are based on personal experience, and we'll take a closer look at each phase in detail. The first stage is need. This is all about figuring out why we even need a vendor. Usually, the business or functional team realizes there's a gap they can't fill internally. For example, they might need an application development vendor to support growth or a new strategic initiative. Or maybe a logistics partner to handle more deliveries, a cybersecurity firm to protect sensitive data, or a marketing agency to run a big campaign. The business team documents the requirements, including the type of application, the features needed, and its overall purpose. These requirements can also serve as selection criteria for evaluating existing market solutions or deciding whether a new application needs to be developed. For this video, let's assume the business team is considering an existing application, available in market. Within an organization, the procurement team or vendor management team serves as the primary point of contact for vendors. In other words, they are the owners of the procurement process and are responsible for managing the entire vendor life cycle. If the business team is already aware of an existing application in the market, they can share the details with the procurement team. For simplicity, this video will refer only to the procurement team. If the business team is not aware of any options, the procurement team will assist in identifying the appropriate vendor. The procurement team will reach out to each identified vendor and send an RFI, request for information. In simple terms, an RFI is like asking vendors, "Can you provide information about your product or service and how it fits our needs?" Vendors will respond with application details, and the business team will validate whether these meet the requirements documented earlier. The business team will then share the list of vendors that meet their criteria with the procurement team, who will request detailed proposals or quotations through an RFP, request for proposal, or RFQ, request for quotation. The response to an RFP, request for proposal, is typically called a proposal or bid. Here's what it usually includes: company information, overview of the vendor, experience, expertise, and references. Proposed solution, details on how the vendor's product or service meets the business requirements. Implementation plan, timeline, milestones, and methodology for delivering the solution. Pricing/cost breakdown, detailed pricing for products, services, licenses, support, and any optional features. Terms and conditions, contractual terms, warranties, service level agreements, SLAs, and compliance details. Value additions, any additional features, benefits, or differentiators the vendor can provide. In simple terms, a vendor's RFP response answers the question. The business team will share a list of 2 to 3 shortlisted vendors, with priority, to the procurement team. The procurement team will then conduct basic due diligence on these vendors, including legal and regulatory compliance, financial stability, reputation, and service capabilities. Based on this evaluation, one vendor will be chosen as the primary, while 1 or 2 others can be kept as backups. During vendor selection, due diligence and risk assessment play a critical role, but they often create confusion. Are they the same or different? Let's understand this with an analogy of a vendor, which we'll compare to a car provider. Imagine you want to purchase a car. This can be broken into 2 parts, the car provider and the car itself. First, you evaluate the car provider, their brand, reputation, service quality, cost, and availability of spare parts, user reviews, legal compliance, and so on. This is equivalent to the due diligence of the vendor. Next, you assess the car, checking if it fits your requirements, such as safety features, mileage, build quality, seating space, and other specifications. This represents the assessment of the product. In the context of TPRM, the first part corresponds to vendor due diligence, examining reputation, legal and regulatory standing, vendor resilience, and the services offered. The second part corresponds to detailed risk assessments, such as cybersecurity, financial, and reputational risk assessments. Once a vendor is selected, a vendor profile is created in the GRC tool, if available, or in another TPRM tool such as KY3P. Next, the inherent risk rating is identified. This is determined by multiple factors, but the most important is the type of data the vendor will access, whether it's personal information, financial records, or other sensitive data. To make this easier, organizations rely on their data classification process. For example, if the data is classified as critical, then the vendor's inherent risk will typically be rated as critical as well. After that, the procurement or vendor management team coordinates with different stakeholders to conduct detailed risk assessments. These may include cybersecurity, operational, financial, reputational, compliance, and strategic risk assessments. The entire process is tracked carefully from initiation through to closure. Consider cybersecurity risk assessment as an example. When we talk about a cybersecurity risk assessment for a vendor, the process starts with a clear understanding of scope. The business team defines exactly what services the vendor will provide and updates these details in the vendor management tool. Once that's done, the vendor receives a questionnaire. This is usually predefined, but it's tailored to the type of service. Say, an application vendor would receive an application-specific questionnaire. And if the vendor doesn't have strong technical knowledge, the procurement or security team may step in to support and guide them through it. With the responses in hand, the risk analysis begins. Here, the vendor's answers are reviewed to spot potential weaknesses or gaps. Each risk is then rated critical, high, medium, or low according to the organization's framework. Next comes risk evaluation. This step compares the identified risks against the organization's overall risk appetite. It helps determine which risks are acceptable and which need urgent attention, with priorities set based on severity and impact. The results are pulled together in a risk report. This is shared with the business team and the vendor, so everyone is aware of the findings and the next steps. The vendor then takes action through remediation. They prepare a treatment plan that might involve fixing the issues, accepting certain risks, or implementing mitigating controls. If risks are fully fixed, the analysis is repeated to confirm closure. If only partially fixed, the remaining risk, known as residual risk, is carefully reassessed. Finally, a business decision is made. The business team looks at the residual risk and decides, can it be accepted? Should it be avoided, transferred, or does it need further action? If the residual risk falls within acceptable limits, the vendor gets the green light for onboarding. In a similar way, the procurement team will also seek confirmation from other stakeholders such as finance, legal, compliance, operations, and information security to ensure that all aspects of vendor risk are assessed and addressed before moving forward. The procurement team prepares the initial version of the contract, based on vendor negotiations, business requirements, and standard templates. This draft contract is then circulated to key stakeholders across functions to make sure all risk and compliance requirements are covered. For example, the cybersecurity team reviews data protection, access controls, confidentiality, and other security requirements. The business team ensures service level agreements, delivery timelines, and performance metrics are clearly defined. The finance team checks payment terms, invoicing, financial guarantees, penalties, and audit provisions. The legal and compliance team reviews the contract language, regulatory requirements, liability clauses, and governing law. Once all feedback is incorporated, the contract is finalized and signed. This marks the beginning of vendor onboarding, which includes activities such as tool implementation, access provisioning, and other setup tasks. Finally, the vendor is added to the organization's vendor inventory, along with their contact details, business owner details, and severity classifications such as critical, high, or medium. Once the vendor is on board, the monitoring phase begins. The business team tracks service level agreements, such as how often SLAs are breached, along with key performance indicators that measure delivery timelines, quality, and overall performance. Meanwhile, the procurement or vendor management team monitors additional areas that go beyond day-to-day performance. This includes keeping an eye on cybersecurity incidents, changes in financial health, compliance with regulations, and even the vendor's market reputation. Together, these checks ensure that the vendor not only delivers on business needs but also remains reliable, secure, and compliant throughout the relationship. Risk assessments are not a one-time activity. They should be performed regularly as defined in the TPRM framework. Periodic reviews are conducted based on the vendor's risk level. Annually for critical and high-risk vendors. Biannually for medium-risk vendors. And every 3 years for low-risk vendors. Risk assessments are also triggered during service or scope changes, such as when a vendor expands the services they provide. Finally, assessments are performed after significant events, for example, a cybersecurity breach, a regulatory violation, or major business changes like mergers and acquisitions. This ensures that risks are continuously identified, evaluated, and addressed throughout the vendor relationship. If the vendor's risk remains at an acceptable level and no issues are found during the monitoring phase, the contract can be smoothly renewed. However, if significant issues are identified, the organization may choose to terminate the contract, which triggers the vendor offboarding process. This ensures that vendors who no longer meet business, compliance, or security expectations are formally disengaged in a controlled and risk-aware manner. Vendor offboarding can happen for several reasons. When a contract expires and the business decides not to renew, maybe due to a strategy shift or new in-house capability. When poor performance is observed, such as repeated SLA breaches during monitoring. Or, when critical or high risks are identified but not remediated within the agreed time frame. During offboarding, there are several important actions to ensure a clean and secure exit. Ensure the return or secure destruction of data, and obtain a formal certificate of destruction. Revoke all vendor access, whether system, application, remote, or physical. Recover all issued assets such as laptops, access cards, or devices. Conduct a knowledge transfer to internal teams or the replacement vendor. Settle all outstanding payments or penalties. Document lessons learned from the relationship to improve future engagements. Finally, update the vendor inventory to reflect the termination. Vendor offboarding closes the life cycle in a structured, risk-aware manner, protecting the organization from residual dependencies or exposures.